wonderful to see everyone here today. One way of honoring the many indigenous peoples that have lived here for thousands of years before European colonialists arrived, peoples that continue living here to this day, despite systematic efforts to undermine their cultures and languages, is to learn from the kinds of language, knowledge, and ideas about the world that are ancient and part of the living history of Turtle Island. Recently, I had the honor of meeting the Indigenous law scholar and law professor at the University of Toronto, John Burroughs. He shared with me the Anishinaabe idea of the word Ode. I'd like to share this with you today as a way of starting this session. This is in the Anishinaabe-Moan language and Ojibwe language. The sound of creation on Turtle Island is the sound of de, 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 as a kind of vitality and fertility of growth and proliferation of life. Now, the word for heart in Anishinaabe-Moan is Ode, and the word for drum is Ode Wagon. And even the word for fire is Ishkode, as part of the intensity and life of what the fire is. Now, I was heartened to also learn that the word for city or village is Ode Ma. So suddenly we have a link between creation, heartbeats, drumming, and the city itself that we live in. And even going one step further, the word for truth itself is Ode Bwewin. Now, this is a beautiful idea to me as we're gathered here, since it creates a resonating bridge, a kind of rhythmic bridge between all these different levels of creation and drumming and heartbeats. It helps us turn this council chamber into a sort of resonating chamber where we're tuned and in a way vibrating together in this space with all the proceedings of what's happening. Now, for my own part, I'd like to thank some people that brought this together. You know, I had the pleasure of knowing about Joe Mihevc for a long time. I was studying with his son in a course that wasn't so had some affinities with this course. It was an inter-university and college exchange. Now, I got to see Joe Mihevc as a father and a community leader, and the kinds of outdoor movie screenings he's been shown, and of course, as a former counselor, I believe that Joe he saw a gap, or he saw a kind of opening, and then he shoved a wedge into that and opened up his world for us, and in a way invited us into that whole world that was this interchange between City Hall and academia, where he, as you know, he's a visiting professor at York University right now. Now, Joe, thank you for inviting us into the world and then actually making us realize it was part of our world all along, and that this council chamber is a space where we feel a sense of belonging and we can contribute to what's happening. You know, indeed, it's changing the way we think about ourselves and as people that are civic-minded and as people that contribute to the city, and even developing a certain kind of civic discourse that's very respectful and that's based on empathy and listening to others. And the way I see everyone here sitting right now, you're looking at me from different points of view, and I think you're also hopefully inhabiting each other's point of view and trying to get different takes on what's happening. And that mutual understanding, empathy, civic discourse, it's beautifully modeled by everyone that we hear from here. And there's no better example of that as well from the City Hall side than Jeff Moore, who has been instrumental to orchestrating this entire enterprise as well. Now, this is a privilege to be here. It's beautiful to be part of this experiment of how to live together and how to define for ourselves, or in a way reintroduce ourselves to what this city is in the first place, through all the perspectives we get to today and with all the other sessions. Now, as you know, we'll be hearing from city staff and officials. You know, as every week, I'm impressed by and inspired by the level of dedication and intelligence and how problems are framed, and kind of the generosity of that, and letting us into the process of how very challenging problems are dealt with. So before we get to our speakers on the topic today of city finances and intergovernmental affairs, there are a couple of housekeeping issues just to point out. Now, today's session is being recorded, so we always emphasize that you don't state any personal information because of that reason. Now, this session will be available on www.civiclab.ca and will be available, made available by your instructor. If you've joined us in person, please turn off the WebEx because we don't want other kinds of reverberations and sound. The washrooms are located in the hallways that way. If you need to sneak out and use the washrooms, and also the emergency exits are that way as well. Now, there will be time for Q&As at the end of today's event. If you're joining the session virtually, please submit a question at the bottom right-hand corner of the Q&A feature of WebEx. If you're joining in person, we have built-in microphones in parts of this council chamber. You can press the button and wait for the light to turn red and then ask your question. But there will also be mics passed around so you can ask your questions. Raise your hand and someone will come to you if you'd like to ask a question. And we very much encourage you. Not only that, but we're quite proud and love to see the participation, the engagement, and to see how the speaker's ideas and points of view have landed in your own mind is a lovely thing to see. As a reminder, after today's session, Dr. Sarah Diamond from OCADU, also the former president of OCADU, and I will be doing a bit of a tour around Nathan Phillips Square and City Hall downstairs. So we will meet by where this council chamber grows out of the ground, by the kind of arborescent structure, the big white tube right under the City Hall on the ground floor. Now, there is also a special event happening in the square today, which is a press conference for the opening of the Spirit Garden. Now, this is something that we will also observe and see what's happening. The Spirit Garden on Nathan Phillips Square is a response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada Call to Action 82, which is for governments to install a monument to residential schools in every city capital. Some of the ideas evoked earlier in the land acknowledgement today resonate with what that sculpture is, as well as many other First Nations and Inuit and Métis artists being represented there in that work. Sarah Diamond and I will be exploring some of the artwork in the vicinity, including the Garden of Justice sculptures. Now, okay, without further ado, we will turn it over to the speakers. I'm very happy to have three very interesting speakers today. Speaker number one is Althea Hutchinson. She's the Executive Director of Financial Planning. After that, we will have Paul Parsons, Senior Corporate Manager, Policy Consultant, Intergovernmental and Agency Relations. And speaker three is Pat Tobin, General Manager, Economic Development and Culture. And I'm very pleased to invite Althea to speak first.
So good morning, everybody. I am so pleased to be here. I'm quite excited. This is my first opportunity to present to Civic Lab Toronto. When I was asked to present and given the opportunity, I jumped at the chance. I think that I've worked both in the public and the private sector, and I can say honestly that my time in the public sector has been the most rewarding career that I've ever had. It's not what I started to do when I was in university. I thought I was going to go out and I was going to the capital world and I was going to conquer it all. But I am so glad that I ended up here particularly here at the City of Toronto, where it has been very interesting for me. I started in 2017 at Toronto Public Health, so I went through the pandemic, and then just most recently I started with the Financial Planning Division, as Marcin said, the Executive Director. So today I'm presenting on the city's budget. So next slide, please. So as I indicated, I'm the Executive Director responsible for the City Planning Division. And the Planning Division does a couple of things, as you might imagine. We provide timely and objective corporate advice, particularly around strategies. We provide analysis. We're there to support the decision-making process of the city. In addition to that, we're responsible for the bringing together and leading the development of the city's operating and capital budgets, and in working, of course, in concert with city divisions, programs, agencies, and commissions. We also provide independent review of all the costs and all the financial aspects of every single report that ends up in this chamber. In addition to that, we also do monitoring of how things are going from a financial perspective. How is the city performing in terms of, the way it's spending its money and all those aspects. And finally, we also have some relationships with the other orders of governments and, of course, working with the agencies, programs, and our funding partners. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through what I like to call some environmental context for you. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the fiscal environment. When I got this was a chart that was presented in another presentation, and it's actually a picture. I had wanted to modify it, but I couldn't. And the way I wanted to modify it is I actually wanted to scale the way that, scale it according to the percentages. Because what's important here is that this is about when any individual is contributing towards the public funds through their taxes, then this is how it gets distributed. And you'll notice that at the municipal level, we received approximately 9% of the taxes that Canadians pay. And when you think about it, that is a very small proportion when you look at what municipalities do, because municipalities are the places where we touch citizens the most. In Toronto, we provide the most direct service in comparison to what the province or the federal government might do. Next slide, please. So looking at Toronto, here, Toronto is unique. I've heard that. I didn't always reside in Ontario, and I would hear that Toronto is unique. I would kind of scoff a little bit at it, and I'd say, what an ego Toronto has. But I can actually say it is quite unique. It's unique because there are some structural financial challenges that Toronto has that other municipalities, and frankly, some countries don't have. And that's represented here. We have a growing demand for services. We provide regional benefits to others. There's also the financial environment. It's worsening. So coming out of COVID, as we've all, I think everybody realizes and people feel within even their personal lives, it is a challenging time financially, and the city also feels that next. And finally, one of the things is that we are the largest city. We're the largest city in Canada, but we're also the 4th largest city in all of North America. And with that comes additional challenges. We have the most shelter per capita beds. We are the gateway for immigration. And finally, we have the largest public transit system that's actually funded predominantly by the city. Next slide, please. So another thing that's unique about Toronto is when Toronto prospers, Ontario prospers, and so does Canada. So we have $50 billion in planned capital investments over the next 10 years. We are the building and the economic hub. In 2023, there were 238 cranes, and that's a mark of what kind of economic activity is happening. As of July this year, there were 183 cranes in the skies. That represents about 63% of all the cranes in the Greater Toronto area. In addition to that, we host national and international headquarters. We contribute billions of dollars in terms of sales tax and income tax. And as I already said, we are the gateway in terms of the largest share of immigration. Next slide. Continuing on, along that theme about when Toronto prospers, so does Ontario and Canada. One of the things that happened in 2023 is the City of Toronto, or the City Council, they adopted a report called the Long-Term Financial Plan. In that, it noted that over the next 10 years, there would be a shortfall, or there is a pressure of $46.5 billion. So I'm a finance person, and even to me, that number means nothing. It is so large that you can't wrap your mind around it. It is a huge number. And in terms of how it's broken out, there's a chart there that provides it for you. When you're dealing with something that big, you cannot eat the whole elephant all at once. You got to break it down. So here I've provided, some of the key areas that we focused on in 2024, and that was, of course, the $1.5 billion opening pressure that we had when we started putting together the 2024 budget, and also looking at the unfunded capital needs, which was roughly about $29.5 billion over the next 10 years. Next slide, please. But that's not to say that even though there are challenges, we're not inactive. The City of Toronto, we have taken action on how we're going to address some of these components. So we did actually address the opening pressure of $1.7 billion in 2024 that we started out with. We did adopt a long-term financial plan, which is, I can't explain how fundamental that is, because one of the things in municipal government, in terms of your budgeting, is that you are required to balance your budget every single year. You cannot run a deficit. You cannot budget for a deficit. But we were looking through the long-term financial plan about how do we actually look at, not even though we're required to do things within 1 year, how can we start thinking in multi-year terms, and how can we look to resolve some of the significant challenges that were facing us. So the other thing that we did is that about $1.3 billion of the property tax, it goes to, as 25%, it actually goes to other services that are typically, provided by the federal government, or they're extenders of the federal or the provincial government in terms of housing, transit, and healthcare, and social services as well. So we operate, as I said already, the largest transit system in all of Canada, purely on the revenues that are generated through the city's revenue tools. And finally, we also have the largest per capita in terms of shelter beds. Next slide, please. I've already mentioned the long-term fiscal plan. I should probably spend more time on this, but I won't, because I've been given a time limit. I could spend quite a lot of time talking about this, but the major points to take away from this slide is that it's a journey. It is not going to be solved in one day, and I've highlighted in particular something in blue. The solutions that the City of Toronto needs, it has to take, we call it the whole of government approach. We cannot do this alone. It's going to involve the involvement of the provincial and the federal government. And in that, I think one of my, the next presenter, Paul, will be probably talking to you a little bit more about that. Next slide, please. The thing I have to say, and it's a resounding thing, it's a whole of government approach, right? Because we cannot, it's not going to be one thing. This slide represents for you the actions that we've been able to take. So the first blue ones are the things that were within the control of the city that we have been able to do, or that we are doing. 10% of it, past actions that we've done in order to bring financial sustainability. The next 30%, they represent some of the actions that were in the long-term fiscal plan, as well as some of the actions that we continue to do over time. And then finally, that 60%, which is huge, again, it's a whole of government approach. We need a new fiscal framework in order for the city to continue to be a place where people, feel safe, they feel prosperous, and they feel belonged. Next slide, please. One of the aspects that happened is that, luckily, the Premier and the Mayor, they provided instructions during the course of getting into the 2024 budget. They gave a mandate to create what we termed a New Deal. It's got a longer title, but we just call it the New Deal for short here. And what it did is it really did support the 2024 budget process. It provided about $1.2 billion over 3 years to support our operating budget. It also provided about $3 billion in capital over 10 years, and that included uploading the cost of the redevelopment of the Gardiner Express. And what the New Deal did is, besides the financial, which is huge and important, what it really did is it was a recognition that, yes, this does need a whole of government approach. And what it did is that we're going to continue to have those conversations. It's not a one and done. It's the beginning of a long-term relationship that we hope prospers and actually benefits all the citizens of Toronto and those who visit or play in Toronto. The other thing I would say, sorry, before I go on, is that it does focus, there's a strong focus on transit and shelter services within the New Deal. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty of, what is it? Like, what is budgeting? What do we do here at the City of Toronto when it comes to the city budget? There are two budgets. There's the operating budget, looks at 1 year, and then there is the capital budget, which is 10 years. If I were to think about it in my own, if I were to personalize that, my operating budget would be the things, I'd look at how much, my income was going to be for a year, and I'd plan out all my expenses, and I would have to make sure that, of course, they're balanced. The 10-year one, I equate it to more like, okay, I'm going to buy a house. I know that in 5 years' time, I might have to replace the roof. Maybe in 10 years' time, I might have to do a reno in my kitchen or upgrade my bathrooms. And I have to start thinking about that today, about how am I going to fund those expenses kind of going out. From the city's perspective, that operating budget is about how do we deliver those programs, the day-to-day programs that citizens, rely on, the recreation programs, the waste and recycling programs, daycare, public health. The list is there. And in terms of the capital plan, how do we maintain our capital assets, the building equipment, the roads, the sewer systems, the transit systems? All those components need to be considered when we're putting together the budget. Next slide, please. In terms of the 2024 budget, the highlights are there. $17.1 billion in terms of the operating budget, and just short of $50 billion for that 10-year capital plan. That budget was informed by a number of things: the long-term fiscal plan or financial plan, the public consultations that happened with the public when we were talking about the budget in the fall of last year, the New Deal, as well as outside of all those factors, there's also all the work that goes into creating a budget where the agencies, the programs, the divisions get together and they're actually reviewing their individual budgets to see what they can bring to bear to support some of the challenges that we have. Finally, one of the components that we wanted to do was to maintain core services and service levels. We also wanted to invest in, many, many things, but the three top things were transit, affordable housing, and as well as making Toronto safer. Finally, as everybody might recall, there was a increase that was put forward in terms of the property tax, and it was an 8% residential property tax. Next slide, please. So for those of you who are visual, this is a graphical representation from the terms of the operating budget and the capital budget. What is it doing? What is it supporting? So you'll see here that $15 billion actually supports what we call the tax-supported programs. And then we've also have about $2 billion that supports the rate-supported programs. There's three: Toronto Water, Solid Waste, and finally Toronto Parking Authority. Every other program or every other service that the city delivers, that would be funded through the what we call the tax-based supported programs. And then on the capital side, I've given you the same representation. Of the $50 billion that we're spending, about 64% of it is supporting all the assets that we need in order to deliver those tax-based programs. And about 36% of it is going towards supporting all the assets that we need in order to deliver on water, solid waste, as well as the Toronto Parking Authority. Next slide, please. This one is another graphical representation, but what this is talking about is where do you get the money? Where is this money being generated from in that 1 year for the operating budget and the 10-year for the capital budget? And you'll see that the property tax, $5.3 billion. It only represents 31% of the total cost to run the city's operating budget. You'll notice that I've highlighted in green the federal and the provincial government. So their contributions. As I previously mentioned, there's an expectation that municipal governments are delivering on some of the responsibilities that historically have been the responsibilities of either the provincial or the federal government, and that's their contribution towards it. By way of context, I want to focus a little bit on the transit fares. So there it's $1 billion. That's what we collect from transit fares. But the program itself actually costs about $2.6 billion to deliver. That means that $5.3 billion, the city is actually subsidizing through your taxes the cost to actually running the transit system. And then on the capital side, you'll see we've got a number of different sources as well. I want to focus in on the second line, which is debt. So the City of Toronto actually issues debt in order to pay, the example I gave was for your house. So that would be you saying, okay, you know what, I'm going to go and get myself a mortgage in order for me to renovate my home. The issue with issuing debt, however, is that you have to pay for debt. So every time you issue debt, in order to pay for your capital, you have to pay interest costs, which of course then you have to pay out of your operating. So it becomes this issue where we try as much as we can not to have to issue debt. That's why having partnerships with the federal and the provincial government to support some of the capital is very important to us. Next slide, please. I've just provided this one here to just reiterate to you again some of the services that the operating budget provides. The one thing that you don't see, it's clustered, but in all that, the city actually provides about 150 distinct services to the citizens and the individuals who either work or just play here in the City of Toronto. Next slide, please. In terms of the 2024 budget, even though there was an issue in terms of the pressure that we brought in, when the budget consultations happened, we heard very clearly from the citizens of Toronto that housing was important to them, transit was important to them, and community safety was important to them. And because of that, through the 2024 budget, we did put additional programs in and provide additional funding to those particular items as demonstrated in this slide. Next slide, please. Here I'm going to switch from the operating, I'm going to talk about the capital budget a little bit. So $50 billion, and it's there right now, our asset base is $181 billion. And this, of course, provides you some information of, where are the assets, what's the value of the assets that we have within the City of Toronto. The reason why I'm laying this out is because in the next slide, I'm going to talk about some of the pressures that are around, supporting and maintaining all these assets. And the way we look at assets and the way we fund assets, there are 5 categories that we look like. We say, okay, is this asset supporting health and safety? Is this asset supporting some sort of legislative requirement where we're mandated to do it through law? Is this asset just taking care of what we currently have? It's a state of good repair is a term we use. Is this asset actually related to growth? Or is this asset that we're going to do a service improvement? And so those are the 5 components that we look at. Next slide. As I already mentioned, for the 10-year plan, just short of $50 billion, but in 2024 alone, we started out with $4.6 billion being our budget. It has actually grown since that time, and it's grown, of course, because capital is a thing that it doesn't happen in 1 year, it happens over multiple years. So there are some projects that we had from the previous years that weren't completed. So if you were to go look at our financial statements now, you would notice that our budget is just north of $5 billion for 2024. Again, I want to emphasize, we really try to maximize not having to issue debt in order to support it. So we don't want to bring out the credit card and then later on have to be paying, those high interest costs. We'd prefer to have, forego having to pay that so that we can reinvest in the programs that really direct and impact people's lives, like park services, for example, or transit. We, of course, through the capital plan, we are leveraging the city building fund. So I talked about the property tax increase was 8%. It was actually 9.5 because 1.5 of it actually goes towards the city building fund, and most of that is there to support transit and housing. The other thing that we did in 2024, not that we weren't looking at our capital in terms of climate change, but definitely there was an enhanced view on how and what we're doing and how we're delivering our projects, how can it support reductions of greenhouse gases. And finally, one of the things that you'll hear the CFO, who's my boss, talk about is state of good repair and the backlog of state of good repair. So we spend about 52% of our entire budget goes towards state of good repair. That's just keeping the assets we have running and able to provide services. So 26 billion of that 50 is state of good repair money. And over last year, 2023-24, it actually increased by 1.8 billion, which is indicative of the fact that, our assets are getting older and it just costs more to actually replace them. Next slide, please. I've spoken about this already, but I wanted to reiterate and drive home one more time. Our focus in terms of the budget in 2024 on the operating and the capital side. Refugees, for those of you who were here and you were watching any news outlet last year, you would have seen the crisis around refugees. That, of course, is linked to housing and, of course, transit, community safety. We were focusing on the long-term capital plan. And again, that whole of government approach. We cannot do this alone. We need our partners. And on the capital side, there was the New Deal, which was the Gardner. We had the City Building Fund. This year, we actually extended it by another 10 years. It was planned to end in about a year or so. Investing in climate change and a strong focus on state of good repair. Next slide, please. So the process itself, I'm going to quickly go through this because I think I'm running out of time. It's there in detail for you. But basically, it starts with my division sending out a nice little letter, which everybody loves to get, basically saying, it's budget time, folks, let's go. It's an exciting time for us, maybe not so much for everybody else who gets our little memo, but for us, you know, it's the epitome of what we do. So we send that out. The divisions and agencies, they develop their budgets, they submit it to us, and then there is a lot of conversation that happens, months and months of conversations, where we have discussions about what was submitted, what are the pressures that you're facing, what is the inflationary pressure, what new programs do you want to bring? And we work in collaborations with those agencies and divisions in order to land in a particular space. And then we bring that to the senior leadership table for the City of Toronto, and there's some more discussions. Because remember, we have to bring in an operating budget that is balanced. Finally, there is a budget launch. But before I get to that, last year, the City of Toronto did an extensive budget consultation, and I can say that we're going to be doing public consultations again sometime in the fall, and it'll be an opportunity for anybody who's interested to be engaged in the budget process. There is a budget launch that happens. This year it is scheduled for January 13th. Mark your calendars, everybody. And after that, there's lots of consultations that happen with the budget committee itself. Then the mayor will present her budget, and then it goes to City Council for deliberation. And again, mark your calendars. That day is February the 11th. Hoping to see all of you there. Next slide. So let's talk about what does 2025 look like. So when we do a budget, we don't just do it, we do it for 1 year, but we also put in like an outlook. So going into 2025, we already know, based upon the information that we have an opening pressure of about 1.4. There are some actions that we can already take that's going to bring us down to about 1.2, I should say the word billion, and not just, you know, to put it in context. And so we started the process where we've gotten the submissions in, we're reviewing them, we're looking at what we can do internally in terms of service efficiencies, you know, looking at procurement, ways that we can achieve savings in order to bring that down. So that, you know, and also working with our partners on what other revenue tools are available or revenue sources will be available to us in order to mitigate the tax increase that we're going to have to bring forward. Next slide, please. And in terms of the capital budget, what are we looking at in 2025? Again, I'm going to focus here on the decision-making tools. We're looking at climate change. We all had a very interesting summer, and climate change is something that we have to apply in how we're going to be able to reduce the greenhouse gases. We've also introduced a new tool called the Capital Prioritization Framework. It is the first of its kind, I can say, in Canada, because when we went out to do a jurisdictional scan, nobody seemed to have it, so we developed one here at the City of Toronto. And finally, there was a report that was put forward for the Capital Asset Management Plan. And what that looked at was the assets that we considered non-core infrastructure. So it's every asset except for water, wastewater, stormwater, roads, bridges, and culverts. And we looked at how much would it cost if we had to replace everything. $72.9 billion. And then we looked at how much do we actually have to maintain the service? About $40 billion. So there's a shortfall of about $26 billion that we would need. So if everything were to fail tomorrow and we had to replace it all, we wouldn't have any money to do it. Next slide, please. I feel like the doom and gloom. Anyways, this is my last slide, and it's really a call. I don't like the word call to action. I think it's a call for support, a call for help. So engagement to me is really important. Even though I sit in my room and I'm looking at all the numbers, having a better understanding of what the citizens of Toronto really want is important in developing the budget. It helps us determine where does that money go. So here we're asking you, and pass it along. I'm going to show my age. It's like the Vidal Sassoon commercial, and we told one friend and they told two friends and so on and so forth. Get the word out. We are really interested in the feedback of the citizens of Toronto. There's lots of opportunities to participate. There's the public engagement. There's, of course, budget launch. I don't know if I should quiz somebody and ask them what day is it, but I won't. There's, of course, you can write to the budget committee. You can make submissions there. Finally, you can talk to your councillors. And of course, at any time, you're always more than welcome to visit a council meeting to see, the decision-making that's happening live and in person when it comes to financial matters for the City of Toronto. So I'm just going to turn it back over to Marcin at this time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Althea Hutchinson. That was really amazing to hear the range of what's involved in both operating and capital budgets, and thank you for outlining the pressures, priorities, and even ways of getting involved. So that's amazing to hear. Our next speaker is Paul Parsons, a Senior Corporate Management Policy Consultant, Intergovernmental and Agency Relations.
Thanks, Marcin. That is the worst job title of any of us here, I think, but it is the best job, in my opinion, and I'll talk a little bit about why right now. So the first slide, maybe before I do that, I'll talk about myself and how I got into this very interesting job and working with the city. I was talking with Pat before the session, and Althea mentioned this as well, that our current jobs don't really bear a lot of relation to how we started our careers, and we're discussing whose was most unrelated. I think it's mine, but you guys can be the judge after you hear Pat. I studied international development in university. After leaving, I worked in the field, so to speak, in Laos in Southeast Asia. Did that for a couple of years. Decided I wanted to do a master's degree in agricultural economics. So I went to the University of Guelph for that. Realized I'd have to do a whole lot of remedial math and calculus that I'd never learned before. It would have been an extra year, and instead I had the option to take a rural planning program. And I found myself very interested in that, not just because I could get a degree a year sooner, but also the issues and topics were very interesting. From that, one of my professors had a connection with the city of Guelph. So I got in working at City Hall there, literally between the mayor and the CAO's office, doing some just research work and stuff for them. Literally a chair in the corridor between the two offices. So I got a real feel for being at the center of the action and seeing the political and bureaucratic processes and how they play off against each other. And that took me into what they call the Ontario Internship Program, which I think still exists as an internship program with the Ontario government. And I worked there for a long time, mostly in municipal affairs and housing, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. So again, learning a lot about municipal and city issues, and I worked in an area called Cabinet Liaison. So it was briefing our minister for cabinet and committee meetings, dealing with the central agencies of the government, and really seeing that interface again between the political and the civil service. And after about 14 years in the province, doing various jobs, I came to the city and worked in intergovernmental relations within our city manager's office, which I will talk about now. The first slide, Serafina, thanks, just talks about what intergovernmental relations is. And in a nutshell, it's kind of about influence, persuasion, relationships, ultimately getting what we, the royal we, for the city of Toronto, what our elected political representatives, what the people want, and what's best for us. And at a high level, the best public policy outcomes. So what that actually looks like, what we do, how it manifests, the forms intergovernmental relations takes, that's going to vary a lot depending on the issues that are at play, sometimes the personal style and preferences of the lead actors, especially the mayor and the premier and the prime minister are key people. Partisan alignments, not as much as you'd think though. Whether we have majority or minority parliaments, and of course where we are in the electoral cycle affects what's going on. If we're going into an election, that drives you may have noticed in the news lots of very high-profile announcements from the premier lately. It seems like we're entering the silly season a bit. It might be an election coming earlier than planned. That's the rumor anyway. So it's a very interesting context. The federal government, of course, is a minority parliament. It's a bit precarious now that the agreement between the NDP and the Liberals has been cancelled. called off or canceled. What was I can't remember the phrase he used. They ripped it up. That's what it was. We recently concluded a new deal with the province, as Althea mentioned, and I'll talk about in a bit more detail later. And we have a commitment as part of that to some further discussion on long-term financial sustainability. That was just a start. As Althea pointed out, the problems are much bigger than one little deal will take us through. So if we go to the next slide, I'll just talk a little bit about who the main actors are. It's a very clean and simple diagram to describe, I think, what's actually quite a messy and iterative process. So take it with a grain of salt, and we can talk about it more at the end if you have questions. Up at the top of this diagram, you have the political actors. So the mayor is sort of the lead voice and the spokesperson for the city from an intergovernmental perspective. But you also have council members that often play a significant role. They could be chairs of standing committees. They could be appointed to a special position, like to act as a housing advocate, for example, we've had at the city. They could be a chair of an important agency. I think Mr. Mihevc would know something about that, having been chair of public health. Some of our agencies have a degree of independence, and they have a voice as well, and they often use that to advocate on behalf of the city's interests that they're in charge of. And sometimes we have standing committees of council as well. So we have, like an infrastructure committee, so that the chair of that committee may take on a special role as well. The middle box in the diagram, you can tell that I work in the city manager's office because I've put us at the heart of everything, center of the universe. We kind of play a coordinating overall role, a very I like to think it reflects my personal interests. I have a very shallow understanding of absolutely everything that's going on at the city. Not a lot of in-depth, but boy, do you get to know all the different people and players and all the issues at least at a superficial level, and then you can engage the subject matter experts as you need them. And those are really the staff at the city in all the different divisions and all their glory. We have a very broad. As Althea mentioned, we don't get a lot of the tax dollars as an overall share, but boy, does the city do an awful lot of work in an awful lot of different areas. So everything from a transit system to collecting the garbage to running the parks to social services to community centers. There's just a whole range of different functions and a whole range of expertise across the city that we rely on. And all those, we have a very decentralized model because of that. And the divisions have their own relationships with other governments, that they're often out doing things on their own, and it's just our office just can fade in and out of the mix as we're needed, providing advice, expertise, and keeping an eye on things. Monitoring is a good part of the job. I guess the degree of engagement that our office has is driven by the issues at the time. I mean, some are very simple, some are very complex. Sometimes you'll have one overarching issue that just takes over, and we all have to play a part. And I guess the example I can think of is before the pandemic, the provincial budget in 2019, I want to say, would have imposed some pretty significant cuts on the city. And I think it's an interesting case study in intergovernmental because we all had a different role to play. So the different divisions, like especially I think public health and transit, and they had all identified the impact that these cuts were going to have. We relied on our financial people like Althea to tell us the exact level of impact that this would have occurring over time. Our office wrote a report to City Council describing those impacts and what was going to happen. City Council took a position that, okay, this is absolutely unacceptable. We have to do something politically to call on the province to reverse those changes. We reached out to different organizations, advocacy organizations that the city is a member of, and they helped put pressure on the provincial government. So it was a real concerted effort. We had communications people. They started a Stop the Cuts website, engaging the public, getting people to write in to their elected representatives. And it was a real, cross-divisional approach to the problem. And in the end, they did, in fact, back down on most of those cuts. So, it's just an example of the intergovernmental process in action and what can happen. The next slide talks a little bit in more detail about what my our office within the city manager's office does, intergovernmental and agency relations. I like to think we're the center of the universe. It's more of a strategic overview, facilitating role. As I said, I'm not a particular subject matter expert at all, but the expertise does tend to accrue over time. People in my job tend to stay in it for a long time. We've had some, very long time members in the city manager's office. Or even if you're not within our office particularly, you get people in these same type of jobs. So, people who've worked in a deputy minister's office, say, at the province or the federal government, or they've worked in another city manager's office in the same kind of position, just switching municipalities. At the city, we're not what you'd call a central agency. It's not like, some of you I think are probably in political science or administration. You may have learned about cabinet office or privy council office at the province and the federal level. We're not exactly like that. We sort of have more of a soft power role. We don't have the same authority to directly manage the policy agenda, but we try and intervene strategically and provide strategic advice. And the next slide talks a little bit about more about what that actually looks like in a practical sense. Advocating for city interests in a strategic and aligned manner. So the strategic and consistent, we're a large, complex organization. So sometimes we have competing priorities, competing points of view, and our office helps manage that and brings things to the forefront as appropriate. The advocacy aspect is really, it's kind of lobbying. We're helping act as lobbyists for the city, helping our council, our elected representatives rather, act as lobbyists, especially on things like budgets and economic statements. The city generally takes a position, will make a submission to those other orders of government, trying to get our views across, and intervening at strategic times as well on particular issues. We develop relationships. We have regular meetings with our counterparts at the province and the federal government. And those happen, regardless of whatever political firestorm of the day is happening. So even if the political leaders aren't talking to each other or actively sniping at each other, we're still talking behind the scenes. We still try and manage that relationship. We have partnerships with other organizations, especially things like the Ontario Big City Mayors. Oh, we're still on the previous slide, actually, Serafina. On the key intergovernmental activities. I think slide 4. Yeah, that one. Yeah. So I was just talking about the partnerships that we have with other organizations like the Big City Mayors or the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. I'll talk about them a bit more later. We support intergovernmental meetings like between the mayor and the premier, the prime minister and cabinet ministers, but also the lower profile ones. So sometimes individual councillors or committee chairs will have meetings, or just staff to staff meetings on a specific issue. We have a coordination role in terms of intergovernmental funding. So often, as Althea pointed out, we get a lot of money from the federal and provincial government. Often that involves applying to different funding streams, different programs that they offer. So we just have a coordination role to make sure we're not having divisions compete against each other for the same pot of money, or the city's own agencies competing. We try and manage that. There's also intergovernmental tables that we participate in, and often have a lead role on as one of the biggest city in the province by far. And that just depends on whatever issues of the day are live. So right now it's things like, as part of the New Deal arising, we have a table on modular supportive housing, one on Ontario Place, a parking solution for down there on the new site that's being developed. And more timely, figuring out what to do with the site at the Ontario Science Centre and what's going to happen there. Next slide talks specifically about the federal and national level municipal relations that we do. The key relationship here really is with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, FCM. You may have heard of it. The other networks that are listed on the slide there, they kind of flow out of that. So the Big City Mayors Caucus is for mayors of cities that have over 100,000 population across Canada. Obviously, we're the big dog in that room. The Big City Executive Partnership, great acronym. That's the staff side of things, city managers heading up that. The big city intergovernmental table, this is for sort of the big six cities, the Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa is the other one, sorry. And we have, a regular roundtable, and we get updates from our federal counterparts there. So we have people from the Privy Council office and key ministries, like especially housing, infrastructure, and communities that come to those regular meetings and get updates from them, share information back and forth. The next slide talks a bit about provincial relations. Obviously, this is key. You may have heard the phrase municipalities are creatures of the province. I hate that deeply, but there's certainly an element of truth to it. Provinces have authority for municipal governments, so obviously, our important direct intergovernmental relationships are with the province. We have a formal agreement in Ontario governing that, the Toronto-Ontario Cooperation and Consultation Agreement, or TOCA, as they say. And basically, it's an agreement that will consult each other on matters of mutual interest, and it's on a confidential basis. So we can have those conversations early and often, and before things are hashed out in public. It's useful that way. And it's been useful across political stripes. It doesn't matter the ideology of the government in power in Ontario, or the ideology of our mayor, or the ideological slant of our council. It came into force in 2008, and it's been periodically renewed ever since under governments of every type, just because it is so useful. Most recently, it was signed for another 4 years by Mayor Chow and Minister Paul Calandra, Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing at the province. When he became minister, they renewed the agreement then. It's a voluntary agreement, I should point that out. I've always asked for like a TOCA jail to be installed behind the thing here. But we do rely on good faith and voluntary cooperation. And sometimes, you may have noticed that doesn't always happen. When the province, or the premier, I should say, decided to cut the size of Toronto's city council in half, there wasn't a lot of prior consultation on that. There wasn't any. It just happened. So, it's an ideal state, I want to say. And the next slide talks a little bit about what that ideal state can get us. The New Deal for Toronto, I won't belabor the point too much since Althea already went over it. But it's a very big deal. It's literally billions of dollars. And I think the important thing out of it is this was just a start. This was a 3-year agreement to take us into 2026. But then we also had, as part of that, a commitment to assess the long-term sustainability of the city's finances and operations, and to build off of that, consider further actions necessary. So this was a great success. That's why both of us had included pictures of the premier and the mayor like hugging and embracing each other in our presentations. It's been a wild ride getting that done. The next slide talks a little bit about regional municipal relations. In this case, we don't have a formal. There's no FCM for the region equivalent. It's just more ad hoc. We do have Greater Toronto Hamilton Areas Mayors and Chairs Forum, GTHA Mayors and Chairs. That's been active in the past. The former Premier Wynne used it quite a bit. Former Mayor Tory used it. At the civil servant side, we have the Greater Toronto Hamilton Area Regional Prosperity Alliance. That's been headed, our city manager is a key actor there, and that's been very successful. And of course, we also have relations with AMO, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. We're not a member. We sort of went our own way and negotiated our City of Toronto Act and TOCA agreement back in late 2000s. But we do have good relations with them, and we often collaborate and coordinate. And the last couple of slides talk about international relations. Unfortunately, much to my dismay, when I found out our office was responsible for this, I got very excited, but we don't get any junkets. It's more, I direct you to the last bullet that talks about divisions with subject matter expertise, do the direct engagement. We're just a corporate policy lead. We make sure, kind of have an oversight role, make sure that the engagements that city staff have internationally make strategic sense. We provide advice where necessary. And the last slide talks a little bit about what that international engagement looks like and the policies that guide it. But again, it's not so much our office, it's more for the staff and the divisions that have expertise. So you get, you know, our solid waste people have gone to international conferences and talked about best practices, things we're doing in Toronto, learn from them. Water, the environment, everything. Pretty much any issue you can think of. Toronto is seen as a leader, I think, in a lot of areas. And we have a lot to learn from other world cities too. So international engagement is important. And that is pretty much the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take discussion and questions at the end. Right now, I'll turn it over to Martin again, and he'll give it over to Pat.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for staying exactly on time. And Paul Parsons did an amazing job laying out his role as a kind of intermediary and you know, fostering horizontal connections. And did you get a sense Paul Parsons is a bit of a connective tissue? And it was lovely the way he spatialized that for us, and with the metaphor of the literal occupation of the corridor at the City Hall in Guelph. But it's amazing to learn about the different kinds of connections, not just within City Hall, but at different levels of government, as well as international connections. So our final speaker today, he's a veteran of the Civic Lab TO. This is Pat Tobin, General Manager, Economic Development and Culture.
Thanks, Marcin. Thanks, everybody. Thanks very much for taking time out of your day on, you know, one of the last few beautiful days, maybe, in fall. I know you could be doing other things, so this turnout is incredible. And I think it's testament to the people who have put this together. You've heard a lot of nice things about Councillor Mihevc. Many of us hold him quite dear as an exemplar of what public service for an elected official looks like. So it's great from the beginning he was here. And Sarah Diamond, who's been a longtime collaborator of the cities in cultural development. So Jeff Moore on our side, so thank you. In interest of time, and I know you've been sitting here for a while, I'm gonna sort of depart from my slides a little bit. First, I'll get to the presentation where I will talk about the action plan for Toronto's economy that's in development here at the city right now. And I'll try to illustrate why it's important and what it's intended to do with a few concrete examples that will touch on fiscal sustainability and intergovernmental advocacy and a couple other points. But before I do, just briefly, Jeff asked us also to talk about how we got to our careers. So you heard Paul was in Laos immediately following his graduation. I didn't catch what Althea's sort of side turn was out of school and into markets, she said. For me, I thought I wanted to teach. So I came from a high school with incredible teachers, and I thought that that's what I wanted to do. And I had the opportunity, even while enrolled in post-secondary, to supply teach. And it's a pretty dynamic environment for people who work there. There's a lot of labor unrest, as you've seen last year. So it wasn't what I had thought it was. So there I am 2 years in, thought I was heading teachers college. And I was just sort of doggedly going forward until I learned that 2/3 fully Canadian undergrads switch their primary course of study at some point in their career. So that freed me up, and I decided to pursue a history degree. That taught me a lot about the place of Indigenous peoples in Canadian history, a lot which was not known to me. And so this is the mid-90s. And that sort of set me on a course to work with Indigenous organizations. Like Paul, while I was in grad school, I got recruited into a government program. And I had been, at the time, working for 5 years for an Indigenous organization. I'm not Indigenous. And I thought, the last thing I want to do is work for the government. And that's not sort of the ethos you have when you're working with an Indigenous organization most times. But I thought, look, I can't turn this down. I'm going to go learn how government works, come back to my not-for-profit sector setting, and do everything I can to advance our mission with the Indigenous-led organization. What happened to me was that I actually got more done in my first year in government than I had been able to do in 5 years in a not-for-profit setting. And that's not a universal experience, but what it means is if you want, and I think all of you are here because you have a commitment to civic engagement and public good, if you really want to make change, government is a great place to do that. And we really, encourage you to consider government as a career option. And I think reciprocally, our offer is, where you want information about accessing jobs at the municipality, please feel free to follow up with any of us. And this is sort of, just to put a cap on this story, really important reflection for me today, because after here, I'm going out to do a technical briefing and media availability on the Spirit Garden. So for 7 years, we've been working to create, actually, as Marcin said, Toronto's response to Call to Action 82 from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report as a monument to the experience of residential school survivors and victims. And it's a big deal for the city. It's a $25 million project. It's a signature project for us under a reconciliation action plan. And while not yet open to the public, it will be on Monday, and I encourage you all to come down and join with a large number of survivors who are going to be there in what will be a really important moment for the urban Indigenous community, for survivors, and for the city. So with that, I'll launch into a variation on my presentation. So if I could ask Seraphine if you could go to the first slide. So just a little bit about what my role is. We at the City of Toronto pioneered within the bureaucracy bringing together economic development and cultural development. So my job spans both those areas. And why we did that is we felt that both the creative industries and culture more broadly are a big component of Toronto's economy and labor market and actually global image. So there was a merit to having them together. But as goes the economy, and Althea did a great job talking about a lot of the high-level trends associated with Toronto's economy, thereafter, so goes the city's ability to invest in culture. And so for those reasons, we have them together. We've got about 400 staff almost when you count up a large number of part-timers, because we run a series of museums and arts centers, and we employ everything from gardeners to maintenance folks to historical interpreters. We have about 250 full-time permanent positions. Two of those folks, Tristan Simpson and Harsh Sodhi, are here, who do a lot of incredible work for our division. It's a great place to work, as my colleagues would say of where they work. And again, their doors are collectively open for you if you're interested in a job. So now I'll turn to the action plan for Toronto's economy, and I'm just going to take you through the why, the how, and the what of it. This is not yet a public document. It's passing through council in November. So I'm only going to present you sort of really what we've heard from the public in a really fulsome public engagement process. So first, here on the why, it's been 13 years since the city has had an economic development plan, and every city should have an economic development plan. The pandemic had a lot to do with that. And so much has changed in terms of the economy over those 13 years. If you think of the new contours of work as a result of the pandemic, the effects of inflation, changing labor market, changing immigration patterns, so much has changed that there's really an important point now to take stock and provide a new plan. For 15 months, we've been consulting with Torontonians, organizations, residents, academia, labor. I'll come back to the academia part and touch on some of the specific elements from your schools, the business community, civil society organizations, and I'll talk a lot about what we heard, but I want to do so in the context that Althea set out, with three quick numbers that she touched on: 53, 20, and 9. So 53% is the percentage of the provincial gross domestic product that is generated in Toronto. 20% is the percentage of the national gross domestic product that is generated in Toronto. 9% is what we capture in tax revenues. So we're doing a lot of media right now on Taylor Swift, for example, where you're probably all as excited as I am. 6 dates, late November, 300,000 ticket buyers for the Rogers Centre. They spend on average over $1,300 per capita. 70% of them probably are coming out from outside the jurisdiction. It is hundreds of millions of dollars in the local economy. It's a big deal. But we may barely pay for the cost of our city services to cover crowd management, congestion mitigation, because we only have one tool that captures any of that spending, and that's the municipal accommodation tax. So we'll get a little bit out of the hotels, but otherwise we are going to be upping our services significantly at an unforecasted incremental cost to us, but in service of the broader economy and benefit. But that fiscal framework that Althea is talking about, it is a big feature of our ECDEV plan because it has to change for all the reasons that Althea did an excellent job pointing out. She also, one of the dynamics we're working with, again, on the why we're doing a plan, she didn't actually use the word downloading, but it's certainly something that's happening. We don't use the term that much anymore, but we have progressively, and sometimes of our own accord, assumed services that should properly be with the jurisdiction of the province or the federal government. One example Althea touched on is the effects of federal policy around immigration. So I worked at a think tank for a while called the Maytree Foundation, which was all about newcomer settlement and integration. And we had a tagline for the federal government, which was, yes to immigration, no to immigrants. And by that, what I mean, it is not a philosophical position versus newcomers, but they didn't pay for the human costs associated with settlement and integration to the degree that they should. And for us, that just becomes more acute given high levels of irregular migration. Fully today, 50% of our shelter population are made up by refugees, which is an enormous pressure. We have been forced to take out hotels at a cost of about $260 a night as an expanded capacity to our shelter system. So these are costs that the ratepayers, taxpayers of Toronto are bearing, which might more properly reside with other orders of government. You see here data-driven decision-making. Civic Lab has been a great idea. For our ECDEV plan, you only know you're successful if you're accurately measuring. We're working with TMU, the Diversity Institute, on a framework for inclusive economic development and a new way to track the economy at both a population level, but increasingly at an individual level, so we can understand what's happening to segments of the population in the economy. What we've known also over that 13 years since we last had an economic development plan is while Toronto went on truly a historic economic bull run in terms of the prosperity generated in the city, that prosperity was not in any way equitably distributed. And we are seeing what we call an hourglass shape taking form in our economy. We have a larger number of people doing very, very well, and a growing larger number of people who aren't doing as well, down in the first decile of median family income. So that approach to inclusive economic development is something that's going to be really critical. If I could go to the next slide, please. Sorry, I'm skipping it. If you could go one, oh yeah, great, sorry. So how, intergovernmental advocacy. Paul did a great job in talking about the mechanics. I'll talk about a couple of specific projects. So among the things that we're hearing we have to address, labor market. The pandemic has incredibly disrupted the contours of work, the skills match within the economy. You've seen conversation around temporary foreign workers. We've got to get much, much better about producing labor for points at which it's required. This needs to be, given provincial jurisdiction over labor market development, a very close partnership in research, design, and implementation for this city and the province. In one example I'll use is our film sector is doing very, very well. For a long time, we had a cap at about 35,000 jobs. That was tied to a lack of studio space. We are now building studios very, very actively, and clearly in partnership with private sector players. But we know now that we're going to be able to bring online maybe 10,000 jobs over 5 years. But you need those people to be trained and certified and on set in a really predictable way, given the money at play in the film industry. So there's really focused work to try to ensure that we do that. We bring people aboard and train them to be on film sets. Also, because it is a pathway to a highly, well-paying, stable career. And then finally, the film labor market has not been in recent times as representative of the City of Toronto as we would like. And so here's an opportunity, 10,000 new jobs, to address what is a representational deficit and get more Black, Indigenous, and racialized folks working on film sets. You've got a couple bullets here, second and third, on housing and transit-oriented communities. I'll touch on Downsview for a moment as an example of intergovernmental partnership, and I think Paul touched on it briefly. It might be fresh in mind because you may have seen yesterday that Live Nation announced a mind-blowing 50,000-seat temporary stadium at Downsview. So this is because there are so many big concerts, I mentioned Taylor Swift, touring, that we're outstripping the capacity of large venues to handle them. So it's worth it for Live Nation, and you know what ticket prices are, to build a temporary stadium of 50,000 seats that'll run for 3 years. And thereafter, that site, Downsview, which is 540 acres, it's going to welcome 115,000 people. That's the size of Peterborough over the next 30 years, 52,000 jobs. Thereafter, culture will continue to be a significant part of the offering of that space. So this stadium, this deal with Live Nation is a great way to sort of signal brand and, you know, engage the community around culture up there. But these big precinct plays like the waterfront are a huge area of intergovernmental involvement. At a more scaled area, the last bullet here with respect to business improvement areas, we are seeing a lot of transit expansion. Althea showed you some of those numbers, 30 billion, I think, right now in fully funded transit expansion projects. But they don't come without their costs. So if folks are familiar with the 12-year extension of the Eglinton West LRT, the disruption that it has had to areas like Little Jamaica on Eglinton West has been incredible. The risk of loss of legacy black business in that area is really, really, really high unless we all work together to intervene to put a foundation under some of these businesses to allow them to ride out the impacts of transit expansion. I'll go to the next slide. This is a bit more about how we're going to design and implement an action plan in collaboration with HEIs, or higher education institutions. Innovation entrepreneurship, we work really closely with your incubators and accelerators, whether it's Vector at U of T, DMZ at TMU, Imagination Catalyst at OCADU, and we'll continue to do that. Workforce development, colleges are critical. Humber does incredible work. Give you a small example. We've got a Transform TO plan to become more sustainable as a city with net zero goals. The largest emitter in this city are not what you might think in terms of cars and trucks, but rather the inefficiency of our buildings. We've got to move on retrofitting our buildings and adjusting our reliance on fossil fuel heating and introduction of more heat pumps. We do not nearly have enough people in the city who know how to manufacture and thereafter maintain a heat pump. So just one example. Another example, that labor market where we're working closely with the province, and this is probably not lost on many of you here, we are at a decade high in youth unemployment for age 18 to 24. So it's now about 18.5% as of last month, highest in a decade. Worryingly, it is 3 times higher than the next cohort of 25 to 54. That is a trend that's not going in the right direction, and it's one that we all need to pay really, really close attention to. Finally, data and research. I'll touch on another OCADU example. With other government partners, we've helped establish a cultural policy hub at OCAD. Governments, as Paul referred to, and Althea set the context for, we don't have the resources sometimes to do all of the necessary research and analysis that we might like. And what gets us through is working really, really closely with higher education institutions, and ideally in structured relationships like this. So as an extension of that, we've set up a cultural policy hub for that subset of public policy where we look at cultural development. And it's become a really, really effective exercise. You can Google it, and if you're interested in cultural policy, they do a ton, like 2 engagements a month for sure. Next slide, please, Serafina. So I'm coming close to the end here. So this is what will you likely hear in our action plan. So again, we talked to over 4,000 people over 15 months. We had a panel of 25 experts. We relied on not just TMU, but School of Cities at UT and others. So a lot of inputs into what will be a plan, again, brought forward to Council in November. What we heard, though, was this is a city under some stress. And while a 10-year action plan for the economy needs to be aspirational, people did want to talk about many of the issues that they face daily and that they want the city to get right. So we heard a lot about congestion and safe streets and timely and clean public transit and public realm improvement in parks and streets. So our plan will confront that because we're going to need to meet people where they are before we can move on to some of the higher order goals. And those higher order goals too are going to relate to things like productivity and competitiveness. Where does Toronto sit among its global competitors for foreign direct investment, for talent attraction, for the productivity of our industries? Good jobs will be a big focus too. I've just mentioned the stat around youth unemployment. We are leveling out at very close to pre-pandemic levels of unemployment, so that is good. But again, as you segment that out, there are some areas of greater risk. We need to make sure that we're producing good jobs for people. And I've mentioned public realm. Strong neighborhoods and main streets will be a big feature as well. So that is it for me. As Althea offered, with respect to the city's budget process, which launches on February 11, I think, January 11. You have an opportunity to influence municipal policy at various levels. We will be bringing this action plan through the Economic and Community Development Committee on October 23, and those committees are open to deputations or to people providing their views. And certainly the budget will be a very open and engaged process for Toronto's public, and we encourage you to participate. So that's it for me. I'll close where I began. Thank you for your engagement in Civic Lab TO, but your interest in municipal government and for caring about these issues. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pat Tobin. That was an amazing way to ground a lot of those examples in the film industry and concert venues. The interesting information about Downsview Park, also the Transform TO net zero strategy. It was nice to hear about that, and thank you for all the shout outs to the different institutions. That was very much in the spirit of the collaboration of what we're doing today. Now, this is the fun part of where we hear from you. You heard a lot about different kinds of ways of being involved, and we would like to solicit now questions from all of you to any of the speakers or to all of the speakers. Does anybody have any brewing thoughts so far? And we will reserve after the general questionnaire period, we will turn over to some last closing remarks from two Humber students. But maybe first I'll take some general questions. I do see someone over the right by the mic. Yep.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Hi. My name is Yusuf. I'm from Seneca College. And so many individuals, including myself, have been taught the importance of building an emergency fund to prepare for unexpected situations like job loss or economic downturns. With that in mind, I'm curious, how does the city prepare for and handle its budget during crises such as pandemics or financial recessions? What steps are taken to ensure essential services to continue, and how does the city adapt to sudden financial pressures while maintaining fiscal responsibility? Thank you.
I think that question comes to me. That is an absolutely amazing question. And it's a question actually that we grapple a lot with. So the City of Toronto has what we call reserves and reserve funds. One of those funds is called the Tax Stabilization Reserve. And we also have another one called BBB, the Budget Balancing Fund. So if any of you would have been listening to the last budget deliberations, the CFO made a comment. So what we tend to do is in that fund, we like to hold at least 2% of the tax base. So from the slide that I presented, it's 2% of the, sorry, it's not the tax base, 2% of the property tax. So for every 1% of property tax, it generates $42 million. So that's the lowest level that we're required. Coming out of the pandemic, the city did, took some action to address the significant increase in costs that we weren't able to recover from the province. That happened through looking at how do we fund capital. But it's a bit of a vicious cycle. So what happened there is that Pandemic was unexpected, so we stopped spending money on capital. We stopped spending money on state of good repair in order to take care of that, because there was never going to be enough money in the Rainy Day Fund. So that's why in our conversations, I think there's if you take away two things from my presentation, it's the long-term fiscal plan, and it's the fact that we need a whole of government approach in order to make sure that we do have sufficient reserves on hand to take care of unexpected situations and circumstances.
I believe I saw two other questions somewhere over here, and maybe the person right next to me here.
Can you hear me? Hi, my name is Erica, and I'm from Seneca. So my question is for Artia. I wrote it down, so that's not forget. As I'm also very interested in finance, so at the moment, what is the financial position of the city in terms of their assets, liabilities, and then what strategy could be implemented in case the city is running at a deficit in finances, and in case the BBB is not accessible at the moment? What would be the immediate solution to resolve the issue? Also on shelters and affordable houses, if need, since you mentioned that shelter and houses is part of the city main area to focus in 2023 financial budgeting.
Thank you for that long question. I'll try to encapsulate it kind of quickly. So this is I always say to people, accounting is not a science. It's an art form. So I can't give you an answer that was going to solve everything, because every single year, it's almost like a dance. So every single year that you're going into it, you're dancing. You're trying to figure out, what are we going to do? What strategies are we going to bear? There's some tried and true strategies for sure. One of them we call line by line. I myself personally am not a real fan of it, but you need to do it, because you need to kind of take a look. Think about it in your own, it's a larger issue, but think about it, I'm going to localize it to your own life, right? When you are there and you've got a job and the job is paying you well, you do have to set aside funds, but things come up out of the blue. So what do? You have to sit down and you have to have that discussion with your family about, okay, maybe we don't take that trip. Maybe, we cut back on going to the movie theater, going out to supper. And I'm using that to just kind of draw it down to us. These are the same kind of discussions, different discussions, but very much those principles apply. So in the next couple of weeks, I will be having lots of discussions with lots of people about how are we going to actually ensure, because the one thing legislatively, we cannot have a deficit. It's tough conversations, for sure. But luckily, the other thing too is that, like I said, there are reserves, and we try to look for other ways to go. And the long-term fiscal plan, we were really hanging our hat on that, and we're really hanging on our hat on the work that Paul and his team are going to do. And actually, you as citizens of Toronto, engaging in this process and engaging with other political leaders to voice, your concern about whether or not Toronto is actually getting the support that it needs from the tax dollars that you pay, so that you can continue to enjoy, the life that you are paying for. So that's my response.
I think we have time for one more general question, hopefully for Paul and Pat. And maybe we'll take that one over there.
Hello. Hi, I'm Giovanna Mendez from University of Toronto. And thank you for all your very informative presentations. And my question, it's for Alfie. And what is Toronto current debt level? And what are the key components for its financial plan? As you mentioned, this plan is publicly accessible. However, could you provide a brief overview of how the City of Toronto develops its financial plan, and who are the key decision makers involved in this process? Only this department, or who else approves all these plans? Thank you.
Oh, wow. That's, again, another excellent, but I cannot really provide a fulsome response to all the questions, but I'm going to very focus on the very last one about who makes the decision. So we do have a Strong Mayor's Power Act. So at the end of the day, the mayor puts forward her budget, but she doesn't sit down and do it by herself, obviously. So it's really a collaborative effort. I really cannot stress how much discussions actually happen in the development of that budget and how much we really do appreciate people coming out and the public being engaged to tell us, what do you think is important, right? So there are lots of people engaged in this process. Ultimately, it is the mayor's budget that she puts forward. That being said, it does come to council, and council has opportunities, and your local councillors have opportunities to influence the budget process as well. I'm happy to, maybe if you're interested, I can stay back and talk to some of those other questions that you had. Sorry. I just want to give my fellow panelists here an opportunity. Somebody ask them a question.
Well, I think the two Humber representatives might be brewing a question for one of the other speakers as well. I'd like to introduce two students from Humber Polytechnic, Jax Steele and Injala Rajab Khan. So we'll start with Jax, maybe for some closing remarks and final question or comment.
Right on. Can everyone hear me? Perfect. Alrighty. So before I get into my question, I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank you all for being here today. Althea, I think your job seems very complex. I had no idea what went into city budget planning before this, and I think having that insight is very helpful for us all, especially for those of us who want to get into policy work. Paul, your job sounds very fun. It's very interesting to see how those kind of behind the scenes conversations influence what happens within our city. And Pat, I just wanted to take the moment to thank you for grounding the conversation in equity, which I think is very important to hopefully all of us in this room. And so my question is directed towards you. I have a bit of preamble. So the City of Toronto budget summary outlines goals for equity and reconciliation within its framework. Within this, a number of quality of life results are stated. Two that stood out to myself are all residents have a sense of belonging and live in healthy, diverse, culturally rich, and cohesive communities, as well as the city continues to invest and delivers safe and sustainable infrastructure that enhances the quality of life of the people in Toronto. Still, when we look around our city, we can see that many physical spaces, as well as infrastructure, so services, have been intentionally designed to keep certain groups of people out, namely people experiencing houselessness, who often feel unsafe in shelters or unable to access beds seem to be targeted. How are city officials working with developers and people experiencing houselessness to promote a sense of belonging for this equity-deserving population within communities, within public spaces, and across city infrastructure?
Thank you a lot for the question. And like those posed to Althea, it is a very big and broad one. So the city subscribes to a housing first approach to dealing with street-affiliated people. That's a dynamic system in that I've talked about refugees and shelter capacity. I think public realm, we understand that 50% of Torontonians live in apartments, and in many ways, just before we begin talking about specific populations, their city parks are their backyards, in some cases living rooms, and that became increasingly apparent over the pandemic. So we talk a lot in the city about park deficient wards, and we talk a lot about the nature of public infrastructure and how we pay for it. And I can tell you one of the highest pressure groups in the city has been a group who focus solely on water assets so that parks can have functioning bathrooms, showers, and that's for everybody, but it is also given the nature of use of people who are facing houselessness of city amenities. Yeah, I think you don't see a lot of defensive architecture in city design, public realm design, so I won't say none, but there is a consciousness that the city doesn't want to create unwelcoming spaces, but you are also, as with encampments, managing a variety of interests and people's claim on public space. So it's a really active conversation. I don't, unfortunately, have a perfect, pithy response, but it is something that is talked about a lot and thought about a lot in the city.
I'd like to turn it over to Ingela for any closing remarks or comments you might have.
Can you guys hear me? Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, and it's incredible to be here today and attending this class. I found today's session very incredibly informative and educational in enhancing our understanding of challenges and opportunities that our city faces regarding finance and intergovernmental affairs and also economical development. Altius provided us with valuable insight in the city's capital budget and also the fiscal plan of the city, and also how our taxes being allocated to the programs and projects that cities are running, and also for the future of our city. And Paul's presentation was very informative, not only informative, but also very thought-provocative about the about the intergovernmental affairs that the city has, because we, as a citizen of the city, we don't think of how the city runs and how we have relations with different departments and different parts of the government, which is very informative. It was very good. It was not only, and how it's they're working together in order to, for the interest of the city, to optimize the funding for the projects and services that they're providing. Paul's presentation was very explained the city's rules on the culture, how the culture plays roles in the city, and also how the film and entertainment industries can provide not only workforce but also generate income for our city. On behalf of Amber College and all other institutions presented here today, I want to extend our heartfelt gratitude and thanks to all our speakers today who came here, take time from their schedule to teach us about these important topics. And also I would like to thank the city and the participant post-secondary education institution for collaborating and giving us this opportunity to come in the City Hall and have this kind of classes, which is undoubtedly will be contributing incredibly in our future. I believe more of this kind of collaboration aiming to educate and engage the public will have a profound impact in our city. Lastly, I would like to thank our professors for supporting and guiding us through all our educational journey. Sorry, I got very nervous. Sorry.
Thank you.
That was very
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Angela. That's really lovely to hear. And there's another way all of you can, not exactly thank, but be involved, is please, just to emphasize again, please take this survey. That is very useful for us. There's a survey that's circulated about the student experience. You just heard some kind of excitement from the students about how valuable they understand this experience to be. We'd love for the survey to give us insights about how this experience is changing how we think about education, the city, and your role in it. If there's other burning questions, I believe some of the speakers might linger for a bit to maybe take some burning questions you might have. Otherwise, please join Sarah Diamond and I downstairs, and we will give a walk around and talk about some art. And Sarah Diamond, would you want to wave your hand just to be more visible? We'll meet downstairs in about 5 to 10 minutes to go for the walk. And just a shout out to the next presentation will be in Committee Room 2, not in the Council Chamber, a different room, Committee Room 2. We will be talking about building an equitable city, and that is on October 11th. Thanks so much, everyone, and see you then.